Hello and welcome to a Squirrel Plays. It's me, the Squirrel, and man, I know I'm slow to get this one out, but I actually took some time in the past couple weeks to work on some other projects, and I gotta tell you, it felt really good to do. If you've watched my channel introduction video, you'll remember that I mentioned I had a handful of other projects that were currently on my plate. And believe it or not, one of those projects is actually writing a book. Well, to be honest, there are several books I have in the works, but one in particular I've been working on with an editor, and we've been trying really hard to get that all polished up and ready for release. And that was what I dropped everything for to focus on for a couple weeks, and that's what felt really good to do. And it felt good to do because that is my main goal in my life. I do want to be a writer, but that's neither here nor there. But since writing is on the brain of late, I thought I'd take time to dive into the D&D side of things for a change. This way the video game crowd can cool off a bit, because if I actually had any viewers, I'm sure they'd all be really mad at me right about now. So now it's time to make the other half of my imaginary viewers angry. This time we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons mods. I know a lot of people call them homebrew rules, but to be totally honest with you, I never understood that. It's a modification you're making to the game, similar to how you would mod something like Skyrim, or any other video game for that matter, so why do tabletops call it homebrew rules and video games call it mods? Don't know, so I'm calling them mods. It's easier, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. With one D&D on its way, it seems just as good a time as any, considering a lot of people are probably going to be changing the rules anyway, so let's get into it. Now, I suppose the first question might be, why use mods? Or why do I, in particular, use mods? Is it because I've played millions of hours of Dungeons & Dragons and I'm seeking a new tabletop experience? Well, believe it or not, I actually don't have a whole lot of D&D experience under my belt. For about 6 months, I played the game as a player. Our group met every other weekend, and we would play for about 3 hours. Due to the size of our group, I barely got to do anything. The DM was a great guy, as were most of the players. We just had entirely too many people, in my opinion. Due to this, there was a lot of me sitting around doing nothing and having a hard time learning the rules because there was such a huge gap between the times I actually got to do anything. I'm 100% serious when I say I didn't know that cantrips had unlimited use the entire time I played, and I had them to use. I ended up leaving the group because I got roped into being the GM for a different set of people. They had gotten a group together, and when it came time to start, the GM that they had chosen completely flaked and abandoned on them out of nowhere with basically no notice. I explained to the group that I barely know the rules myself, but they said they were fine with that and they'd be more than willing to help me along as I was willing to give them a story to play through. So I agreed. Considering these people were already a part of a community I was in charge of, I felt the responsible thing to do was to pick up the slack for the person that flaked. I jumped in, did some research, had some introductions with everyone, figured out what all they wanted and what they were looking for. Then a couple weeks later, I gave them their first session. From there, we continued to play every weekend when life schedules allowed it, and I made the entire thing up as we went. 18 months later, we finished the campaign successfully. As of recording this, we're a few months into our second campaign together, and things are going pretty well. So about 2 years as a GM and a wee bit as a player. Definitely a far cry from millions of hours of experience. But I tell you all of that to tell you this. After about 1 or 2 sessions as a GM, I quickly realized just how poorly some of the concepts and mechanics work in 5th edition. Now, I know that's a touchy subject, as there are people out there that live by the book, and there are people out there that live by the older books and editions, but I got bad news for all of you. The book that you hold so dearly to your heart actually tells you the rules are your own to bend, twist, break, and create. The rules as written are there merely as a guideline if you're not sure what to do, or if you have the thinking capacity of a dead tree, then they're there for you to follow to the letter. The book only requires that you, the GM, be consistent with your rules. And that's why we use mods in Dungeons & Dragons, because the rules and playstyles can't be written as law for every adventure. Each and every table you play at from now until the end of time will be different. Players will want different things. Some will want a fantasy power trip. Some will want a hardcore survival adventure. Some will want to role play all the time, and some just want to roll dice. A lot of folks say it's your job as the GM to be the adult and make sure everybody gets what they need and want, and that you need to form a group that plays well together. But honestly, that's on all of you. You're all supposed to act like adults and be open with one another about how you want to play. I'm going to give you a pro tip right now that'll completely blow your mind, and then we'll get back to the video. Just because you don't want to play D&D with someone doesn't mean they are not your friend. There are people in my life that I would consider a good friend, but never in 100 years would I want to play Dungeons & Dragons with them. On the other hand, there are people that I wouldn't consider my friend, but would absolutely pick them first when making a D&D group. If your friend didn't enjoy your woodworking hobby, you most likely wouldn't drag them out to your shop and put them to work. So why make your friends play D&D in a way they don't want to? And now that I've completely blown your mind, let's get back to the mod talk. Why do we use mods? Because every table is different. Every table requires at least a little adjustment to the rules as written to fit their needs and make their game more enjoyable. Does that mean every mod I'm about to share with you on this channel is something you must use? No, not at all. These are mods I used to work with my group, or just some mods that I thought were a fun and cool idea and seemed to work in what few ways I got to try them out. You can have a look at the mods I've made and see if they'll work with your group, or better yet, you can take my mods and modify them some more to fit your table. And if you do decide to do that, all I ask is that you point them to my channel so I can add them to my imaginary view count. But more seriously, I do highly encourage you to modify and tweak your own rules. This keeps things new and interesting for those that have been playing the game for a very long time. But I will say this, if you're new to the game, then you probably shouldn't start off modding things right away. I have what I would call a healthy background when it comes to modifying rules and numbers and mechanics and formulas, but even I chose to sweat it out. As much as I hated a lot of the rules as written, I forced myself to use them for about 90% or more of the first campaign to make sure I fully understood them and could experience them in action. As somebody much wiser than I once said, you have to know the rules before you can break them. And this is where I'd like to take a moment and give you a little bit of a life lesson. Yes, it's about D&D, but it can be applied to multiple places in one's life. When I originally sat down and wrote this out, I wasn't going to name any names. I was just going to say a certain green-haired YouTuber, but I'm just going to call it like it is. That way, if I'm wrong, people can correct me. I'm going to be using Ginny D as an example here. Now, I don't watch much of her videos, so it's highly possible I'm getting some of this information wrong, and that's why I want to be transparent about who I'm referring to. About a month ago, as of writing this, Ginny dropped a video titled Roasting Myself for a Bad D&D Take. In short, she went through an older video of hers and said she was wrong about a lot of things. Basically, it was play the game how you want to play. She was admitting she was wrong with some things she said, but I feel like she completely missed where she got things wrong. If I'm understanding correctly after watching that video, she has a level of experience similar to mine as far as counting years go. The problem is she already had an online following. So when she got into D&D, she immediately started sharing with people what she felt was or wasn't wrong with D&D and its players. The mistake was she approached her following as an expert on the matter when in truth she had very little experience and limited exposure. She fell into that trap where she put YouTube first and common sense second. And again, I might be getting the timeline wrong here, but this is my understanding. But that's also why I basically gave you my resume of D&D experience at the beginning of this video. I'm letting you know where I'm at currently, and I'm trying to make it extremely clear that each table is unique, which I believe, if memory serves, is the same conclusion that she came to. Unfortunately, it took her a couple of years, some bad videos, and probably some really nasty comments to come to that conclusion. Lucky for me, all my viewers are imaginary, so they can't leave any nasty comments. But also lucky for me, I had other experiences I could pull from that allowed me to see that logic from a mile away. The difference between me and her, other than her hair being green, is that I got to do all my failing off-screen. So, to clarify, this is not an attack on Ginny, even if I'm not a big fan of her content. The life lesson here is to know your experience level. I don't know if it's still a thing, but when I was a good bit younger, people used to say, check yourself. which meant not to step out of line and remember who, what, and where you are. In other words, it was a really nice way of saying, I like you, but you're acting like an idiot and you need to take a step back. So whether you're new or experienced, whether this is about GMing in a D&D game or something at your workplace, don't forget to check yourself. Think about who you are, where you're coming from, and think about who you're approaching and where they're coming from. In other words, ask yourself if you're being an idiot. I absolutely hate long rests in D&D, but that doesn't make them wrong, bad, or stupid, despite what I might say in casual conversation. Lots of players love the ability to long rest, so if you just outright remove them from your game, you're probably going to piss off some of your players. But if you say, I don't like long rests, then check yourself. You might be able to come to a proper solution on how to deal with them in your current group. And really, that's all I'm going to say on this one. I've already gone off on a bit of a tangent. My honest-to-goodness opinion is that Dungeons & Dragons is meant to be modified to fit each adventure played. And that doesn't mean it's solely on the GM either. Get your players involved on the modifications because they're going to be on the receiving ends of it. I know this video is a bit short considering how long it took it to get here, but with any luck there will be another one trailing behind it shortly. And that video will be me sharing one of the mods that we're currently using in our campaign. So until that one rolls out, I would like to hear from my imaginary audience what they think about modifying the rules. Is it something you encourage? Do you think it's an absolute sin to the game and we're all heretics and you're strictly rules as written? Or have you changed the game so much you can't tell it's 5e anymore? Let me know in the comments below.